In this episode, we take a deep dive into Game of Thrones Season 8 and the series as a whole. Full speed ahead. Welcome to the Omega Beam number 48. I'm your host, Oren Merton, and this is a fun one. So you probably know Game of Thrones finished their 8th and final season a little while ago. If you haven't caught it yet, you can catch the entire series on HBO. And the final season was a bit controversial, to say the least. So we thought this was worth a deep dive. Thankfully, we were able to get our friend of the show, Alex Rajczi, who was a previous guest way back in the early days of the podcast, to join Golden and I for a very wide-ranging discussion on both Game of Thrones Season 8 and the series as a whole. So Alex is a podcaster in his own right. He co-hosts his own podcast called Good Question, and he really adds a lot to the discussion, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. Now, I should warn you, if you haven't finished Season 8, there are spoilers. We talk about the season and the series, so there be spoilers here. And if that matters to you, then please go watch the show on HBO or DVD and Blu-ray first, catch the show, watch it all, and then after you've caught it, come back and listen to the episode. So without further ado, here we go. We are here with our special guest, actor? Are you an actor?
I'm a famous actor.
You're a famous actor. Okay. We are here with our special guest, Alex Rajczi, or should I say Dr. Alex Rajczi?
Well, maybe professor.
Professor.
If you say doctor, people ask you for medical advice, and I can give medical advice. It's just no good.
Well, you can give the medical insurance, at least philosophy advice.
That's true.
That's something.
I do work on the ethics of healthcare.
Exactly.
But only the ethics, not the actual healthcare.
Yeah, well, the ethics are probably the more interesting part anyway. And of course, as ever, I'm here with Golden. Hello, Golden.
Hello.
So we were going to chat about Game of Thrones now that it's done. So rather than just talk about Season 8 or just talk about the series as a whole.
You could insert joke here about the fact that if it had actually taken the length of time that it should have for the last season, it would have just been done.
Right. The season should have been longer, but it was not. So that's a good point, though. All good stories, I think, come to an end. I think we all agree that part of the telling of a story is the end, the beginning, the middle, and the end. So before we even get into the meat of it all, were we satisfied with the end, with just where the story ended up and how the ending was told, which are, I guess those are two different things.
Those are two different things.
Yeah. Do we like where it ended up, and do we like how it was told? You get to go first, Alex, because you're the guest.
Well, I'm a little worried because I think I have extremely conventional opinions about this. So, when I read reviews online, lots of people were not happy with a lot of incidents during the last season that they thought didn't make much sense, and a lot of people weren't satisfied with the ending to them, which seemed kind of strange, and in particular things with Bran that seemed somewhat to come out of nowhere. So, I don't have anything new to say that hasn't been said on Reddit 1,000 times, but no, I didn't really like the last season.
Okay. Golden?
My biggest problem was that I think that they needed a longer time to tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with where it ended. Okay. I'm just disappointed with how it got there.
Yeah, and I'm right there in almost in the exact middle, but I agree with Golden that it was too short a season, and I think this is just my opinion, but I think that one of the reasons you thought what you thought, specifically saying things with Bran seemed out of the blue, or with Arya, who just, okay, well, we conquered the big evil. I think I'm going to go west.
Right. Set sail in the ocean.
Yeah. The reason
I think that
commented these things seemed out of left field is because part of storytelling, I think, is warming these things up, is giving you the precedent. Imagine if Arya in season 1 had been on her dad's knee and said, "Daddy, Daddy, what's out west? I want to go there." And just every single season, there was at least a little bit of, "This is crazy. I just want to go out west." Then finally she goes out west at the end, and it's not, "Really? You're going to take a ship?" It's like your sister's queen, and rather than land and this and that, or, run the assassinary or whatever they call it, you want to just go west?
But if you think about it, for most of the time, she had this list. She was so focused on the list. The list was defining her.
Mm-hmm.
This is who you are going to be. This is what I'm going to be. This is what I'm going to do. And I have this list, and I'm going to kill these people. And the fact that she was at the end able to realize that she was more than that list, that there was more than that list, that life itself was more than that list, I think is where the story really left her. When they're up there, and I know you thought this was way too sudden, and the Hound says to her, "The only thing over here is death." They have had that history together. She's gone from hating him to finding this level of respect with him, and for him to stop and say, and she can feel that, and it doesn't take very much for her to get what he's really saying, because they have that history already, and that history didn't occur from the north back down to King's Landing in this last season. It occurred way back when, and when he says this is just death, she finally gets, I think, that she's more than this list, and that it's okay to live a life and to have a life, and maybe what she's done with is Westeros.
See, I like the story you just told better than the one I saw on the show. That's
exactly
I wish they'd hire you as a writer.
Yeah.
I mean, and I guess in a way it's another way of saying your point, Oren, which is that things felt sort of unearned, right?
Yeah.
So she gets on a ship and sails west, and we don't really know why. And then you just gave a beautiful explanation of why that might have happened. And I mean, maybe you just watched the show more closely than I did, which is totally possible. I'm not a super fan. I count myself as a fan, but not a super fan.
Hey, I missed I missed seasons 2 through 5. So
what are you doing on this podcast?
And I did read the books.
Yeah.
Although quite a time ago. But I watched, I think, the first couple seasons, then read the books,
right,
and then kept up with the show. Mm-hmm. But I'm not one that I've gone back and rewatched them and rewatched them and rewatched them. It just seems, even from just the TV show alone, that there's this really complicated relationship between her and the Hound that was built up. And of all of the people in this world, even her family may not know her very well anymore, but I think the Hound gets her.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think you're really giving a convincing explanation of, her relationship with the Hound and how that affected her. I still am puzzled about why she gets on a ship like a pirate and sails west.
Because she already knows what's to the east. The west is what's not known.
Yeah.
There's nothing in the west. There's no expectations. There's no, this is how you have to be. And ever since she was little, her father, wanted her to be a lady, and she's like, well, no, I want to shoot the arrow. I want to be, I want to be holding the bow and shooting the arrow. I want to be holding the sword. She's always had that sense of adventure in her.
And you think she can't do that in Westeros?
I think in Westeros, people will have expectations on her.
Uh-huh.
People will say, oh, that's who you are. And by her going west, it's a whole new world to her. And she can start to really, even more so, not that she hasn't already, make who she is and discover new things. And why would you want to stay in a place that has had so much death and destruction? And why not go see if maybe there's something out there that is so much more?
And imagine how cool it would have been had the writers made that explicit in the final season, rather than leaving, Golden to piece it together for us on this podcast.
Yeah.
As you were saying with unearned, things with Bran being unearned, there's I don't want to say it was a throwaway sentence. It was a very important sentence, but Tyrion says, "What makes a good king? A good story. And who has a better story than Bran?" And as he's saying that, I'm thinking, actually, I think a lot of people have a much better story than Bran.
Again,
I mean, you've got Sansa, who's come from being literally broken to fixed. You've got Arya, who's come from being broken to fixed. Lots of people have come from being broken to fixed.
It's not necessarily just Bran, though. Bran has his story, but he has everyone's story. He has access to the history. So he has all of the previous monarchs or rulers or whatever you want to call them. He has the history of Westeros within him. So it's not just his story that he has all of them. And again, I've said this before, Bran's not really in charge, it's Tyrion. It's his punishment and his blessing. And I think that he will be the one that hopefully makes the better decisions for the entire world.
I did think one of my favorite lines of the finale was when Tyrion is saying goodbye to Jon Snow after he's going to his quote-unquote punishment, which is basically you get to go up north and, live free up north with the wildlings, which is probably what he wanted to do all along. So he's probably pretty stoked inside. But I love Tyrion's line when, Jon Snow says we'll probably never see each other again. He says, "Oh, I don't know. After doing this for a while, I may want to go to the end of the earth just to escape it all." I just enjoyed that.
Off the end of the earth.
Yeah, I just enjoyed that line because it not just because it was cute, but because it did sort of tell you that he understood the weight of just how important of a bureaucrat he was about to become, and just how much responsibility and how much work it was going to take. And it was not...
Yeah, he's not going to be able to be drunk all the time and whoring all the time.
Yeah.
So now that you've mentioned Jon, does one of the two of you have an explanation for me, a person who's not a super fan, of what the heck was going on in the last scene we see of Jon? He just seems to be walking away into the land of the wildlings.
He is going to the wall. I'm putting air quotes here because that's his punishment. But he went beyond it. He's not staying at the wall. Whether or not he's being a representative of the wall, of Castle Black by going with the wildlings, one of the places that Jon was truly feeling free was north of the wall. That's where, he originally meets his first love, and so he's going where he's free.
Oh, but I was asking a simpler question, like, is he abandoning his service?
Well, it could be that
it's not clear.
Yeah, we just don't know.
It's not clear. But it could be that he's just, okay, well, you know what? You're still one of the men here, but we want you to keep an eye on the wildlings. So you go with them and keep an eye on the wildlings.
Right. Because if he's basically a more or less a free agent, then he can kind of give himself his assignment while technically still being quote unquote on the job. So he could still say that no, I'm one of the the men on the wall. I'm just living out here with these people.
No one's checking on him.
Yeah, no one's checking up.
They
on
have
him,
to give him a punishment, so he has his punishment. But in a lot of ways, they also don't want to punish him because what he did was what needed to be done.
It's like that
leads
job
into
title.
A whole nother,
Sometimes I see this job title, editor at large, which just I always imagined was somebody who works for a magazine or something who just roams around doing what they want. So he's a member of the watch at large.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
basically.
Yeah. Okay.
That's basically it. He is at large. So, yeah, as far as the stories go, I have to say, Jon's ending didn't rub me the way that Bran and Arya's did. But even so, and I have to say this as a writer in a way, I guess it's selfish of me to put it this way, but I believe a writer has the right to end their story however they want. You have the right as a viewer, listener, reader to not enjoy it. You have the right to say, oh, didn't work for me. But I'm not one of these people who says, here's what it should have been. I mean, I take it as it is. You know, the writer wrote what they wrote. And if I like it, I like it. If I don't, I don't. I'm not going to rewrite what they did for them. But
we'll let George R. R. Martin do that.
Yeah, exactly. But I agree with what Golden said initially, that I think if they just would have expanded on it, elaborated on it, if all those endings, if how Bran ended up as king, how Arya ends up in the West, if all those things had just been elaborated on enough that everyone understood and felt, okay, it's earned now. People still may not have liked it. They may not, I don't want Bran on the throne, I wanted Jon Snow on the throne or whatever. People may still have had their preferences and may not like it, but at least it wouldn't feel kind of like a cheat. Like they just needed to end it, and so they just said, okay, here's how it ends, and slammed the curtains. So...
Well, that's like a difference. I think it's a great thing you're pointing out, because it's the difference between taste and what we like and don't like, and what you might just call good or bad writing. Right. So, I mean, we can agree objectively in good writing, people don't introduce unearned elements into the writing. Yes. And that's more an objective matter. And then, as you say, if a writer does earn their way through a story and we just don't like where it ends, well, that's just taste. That's something different. But here the problem seems to be deeper.
Yeah, and we can all speculate as to why. I know that it came out in trade papers. I don't know how much you follow what's going on in the industry, but the two people who created...
I follow what you send me. Or
Yeah, there we go. The two people who created the Game of Thrones series, as all this is happening, HBO hired them to do a prequel series. Lucasfilm hired them to do a trilogy of Star Wars movies. They now have a multi-year development deal for... I don't even remember, hundreds of millions. Do you remember how much it was for Netflix? So, I think it's pretty clear that as creators, they kind of did what they wanted to do with Game of Thrones and just needed to wrap it up so they could do all these other things. I'm guessing that one of the reasons they wanted to initially adapt J.R.R. Martin's Songs of Ice and Fire is because they loved the books. Well,
I think that there was an article that he wasn't going to give them permission until one of them... The question was, who is Jon's mother and father? Mm-hmm. And they were able, from reading the books, to answer that question.
Yeah. So they're super fans. These guys were super fans. And I wouldn't... obviously I'm not in the room, I'm not in their head, but I think that it is a safe assumption that the reason that they chose this gig, basically, adapting the Song of Ice and Fire into the Game of Thrones series, is because they loved it. And it's very possible that when they ran out of book, that's what they, the love kind of began to drain out as well. They'd done what they wanted to do. That certainly their creators had created original things before, and they will again. I mean, I'm in no way down on them as a creative team of individuals, but it's very possible that the idea of continuing for a season or two or however long they had to from an outline was just not what they considered a good time. That wasn't what they signed up for, and so their hearts may not have been in it, like it was for the first 6 seasons or however long the books last. I think that does lead, we talked a lot about sort of the royalty and where they ended up and sort of, well, as the name of the series is, the Game of Thrones. So that brings up an interesting question that you had in fact asked me in email, that if we're talking about these characters, they're not just nobility in their titles and their positions, but if we're trying to evaluate who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, do we use ancient, ways of looking at these things, or do we look at them in modern terms? Are we judging them by kind of, what would this be, the 2010s, and how we look at morality and how we look at leadership roles? Or do we look at it from a medieval point of view of what they thought of kings and queens and what you could get away with and all of that?
Right.
I think that's an interesting question.
Yeah. I mean, maybe an illustration will help point out what the issue is. So suppose we wanted to discuss whether, it was a good thing for Sansa to be a separate queen in the North. Mm-hmm. And, look, by modern standards, nobody should be a queen. I mean, I'm not talking about a kind of ritualistic queen like the Queen of England.
Right.
I'm talking about actual queens who rule through, blood lineage. Well, That's a horrible thing to be. It's anti-democratic. It's authoritarian. Mm-hmm. So, she's a terrible person by modern standards. She's a kind of dictator.
She is. She's a totalitarian dictator.
But by the standards that we're supposed to accept within the fiction, because I think the fiction has a kind of artificial morality, we're supposed to believe that there can be such things as just kings and queens. And if we judge her that way, we're going to get a different answer.
Because she wants what's best for all of her people and is looking to all of the people, not just her own selfish or specific needs.
And I think that gets into, in some ways, some of the wish fulfillment of high fantasy as a whole, from Tolkien and the fairy tales on up, is that I think part of the wish fulfillment is that we modern people, democracy is exhausting. Mm-hmm. You have to keep up with what's going on. You have to make informed decisions about who you want to represent you in government. You have to follow what they're doing and hold them accountable. It's exhausting. And part of the wish fulfillment is that you have a messianic father or mother ruler who they do what is right because it is right, and we can just tune out. We don't need to participate anymore because we know that mommy and daddy, have us covered.
I'm just realizing that, if you had asked me a year ago, who do you think should be sitting on the throne? Well, I think one of the best for Westeros would probably be Sansa and Tyrion. And that's kind of what happened. Because basically Tyrion has the lower kingdoms and Sansa has the north. And I'm just I want to throw this in because I don't want to forget about it. One of the things that I liked the most about season 8 was that small little exchange in the crypt of Winterfell between Sansa and Tyrion, where she basically acknowledges that of the men in her life, Tyrion was the best of them. I'm not counting her father or her family in that way, but just he never disrespected her. He always treated her like a lady. He was never going to take advantage of her, and he always treated her right.
So from a high fantasy wish fulfillment point of view, I think that is a great combination of leaders. From a more modern perspective, if it had to be someone at that meeting, you'd kind of think it would be Sam, because he's the one who said, well, why don't we let the people choose? And they, of course, mocked him and said, why don't we let our dogs choose? And democracy, puh. But you'd think he's the one who would give his people more of an actual say in how they're being led.
I think there you're also running into the fact that a lot of the people may not be very educated. So then you're relying on people that are not very educated making decisions for everyone. And I know you're giving me there like,
we're all are we
in that situation right now in the world?
I was going to say,
so,
you mean like today?
So in some ways, and you saw a lot of that. If you look back through history, as more and more commoners or people that didn't have access to education beforehand became more educated, then there's shifts in who should be or who they want in charge.
Speaking of the focus of the common people, this is changing a little bit, the focus, but I think you brought up a really good point talking about what would happen if you gave people who don't know what they're doing a leadership role. So high fantasy
Well,
is...
they have the choice to vote who they
Right,
want to
right.
be.
So you have a situation now, or, well, I shouldn't say now, but in fiction, in
Are you sure you're not meaning now?
maybe I do, in high fantasy fiction, where stories tend to do one of two things. They tend to either focus on the quote-unquote Game of Thrones. They tend to focus on the nobility, that the main characters are noble houses, and we're watching kings and queens and dukes and barons and everything else fight it out, live their lives, have political machinations and all these other things. Or they focus on the common person. They focus on someone at the serf level and what their life is and how it's working for them. Very few stories do both. The classic, in my opinion, version of a story that does both is maybe the best high fantasy story ever told, which is The Lord of the Rings, which after the first book sort of breaks in to two stories, where the one story is the once and future king trying to unite kingdoms and win the war. But the main story, the heart of the story, is both metaphorically and literally about the little people. It's about Frodo trying to win the war himself, and he focusing on the common person and what he's bringing. There's it's not something you focus on in a lot of books, but there's a lot of pages given over to what he's got in his bag. And it's because that's something common people think about. Do I have enough stuff in my bag? Sam is always getting things out of his bag and putting things in his bag and making sure there's enough stuff in his bag. And this is a wonderful way of Tolkien pointing out this is what the common person deals with. They're not talking about heredity and the sword that was broken and reforged. They're talking about, do I have rope? That's what they're talking about.
Do I have food?
Do I have food? And they do such a great job of that split. And bringing it into the Game of Thrones, I thought it was interesting. And this was a choice. I haven't read the books, so J.R.R. Martin may have done this differently. But I thought they made an interesting choice in the series that whenever they want to show someone is bad, they show you the people suffering. But they don't really, there's never like a character or a group of characters. You don't follow. There was, I think, one episode I can remember where the Hound meets that sort of group of like peace-loving people who end up getting killed, and the Hound kills kills them all. Right. The people who killed them, just because he's so upset that these good people were killed. But they don't really focus on the little person unless they're trying to show how, a leader is terrible and doesn't care about his people. Daenerys has become the Mad Queen and just starts burning everyone to a crisp. Then suddenly you see things from the ground level and you see things from the people. But otherwise, the people are kind of ignored. They're sort of like pawns. They're scenery more than actual characters. So my question is, how does that in some ways affect what we think about these people as leader? You'd mentioned Sansa looking out for the people, but do we have evidence of that? Lower
people, or I'm just going to say the common people, that we actually spend any length of time with, really, are the wildlings.
That's true. They are the people
because
beyond
they're the
Western
people beyond
society.
The wall, but we are seeing how they live, and we're spending a lot of time with those people. Otherwise, we don't really get to spend much time with the people from Slaver's Bay. That the people are freed. Some of the people, even the slaves, aren't necessarily happy about being free because now they have to take care of themselves, and no one's taking care of them. So
does that undermine the idea that some of these leaders are noble? That's the question.
Yeah, I feel like the only answer is kind of goes back to what we said earlier, which is that you first got to tell me, is it noble relative to our current values or to old ones? So,
Right.
we've already said, she's a tyrant, right? She may be a tyrant who doesn't execute people the way Stalin did or something like that. But
Right.
I mean, think of it this way. If you brought Sansa, if you made her real and brought her here today, she'd be the worst person you've ever met in your life. I mean, just try having a conversation with her about gender or sexuality or democracy or freedom of speech, right? She'd be the worst person you've ever met.
I don't necessarily think. I think that
maybe you've met a worse person.
No, I think that she has a lot of perspective on those issues. So I think she might be sensitive to them. I don't necessarily think that if she was a queen in this day and age, if the people loved her and loved what she was doing, then she wouldn't be the worst person ever.
Oh, you mean if you brought her here and sort of re-educated her, she'd be willing?
She has a lot in terms of her experience that she's gained in terms of gender and what her gender was supposed to be and how, because she was resisting stepping up into that position. She wanted John there. She never really saw herself as being Queen of the North for the longest time. It's like she was fighting that. Even in that last season, you can see her like, well, no, John, you're supposed to be here. This isn't supposed to be me. But when it comes to time for her to step into that role, she's then ready to accept that responsibility because that's what's left to her. It's what's left to her, and I think she realizes that this is what the best thing that she can do for the people that she cares about, being all of the people in the North, which is why she doesn't say, that's why she says, no, the North is not going to be part of this. The North is going to be separate like we were before. That's the way it's going to be.
Speaking of high fantasy versus reality, about that, I just think you brought up an interesting point about, Sansa saying, no, we're independent. We're going to be, this is going to be its own kingdom.
I wasn't sure if the professor would like to respond to what I said.
Oh, no. We don't always have to go back and forth. It may also just be that you have a different image in your head of what she's like. Like, I imagine if you really brought Sansa right here and we had a discussion of some 2019 issue, like gender sensitivity in the workplace.
Absolutely. Like, oh my gosh, what the heck is going on here? Why are you people not taking care of yourself and taking care of the people around you?
Oh, she seems to me, at least the impression I got, to have a conception of gender that, although it's progressive for the faux Middle Ages,
right?
Like, I think if you met her, you'd be horrified. I mean, we can also, I suppose, and this happens a lot in fantasy. It goes back to your question, Oren, which is that sometimes when people do fantasy or they play Dungeons and Dragons or whatever, they basically take 2019 left liberal values and then they attach those values to a bunch of people who are otherwise murder hobos, and then they create some strange concoction out of it. So
it's going to be my next character, a murder hobo.
Well, you listen to like the, there are these guys, the McElroy brothers, right, who have this hugely popular podcast where they play D&D, and they've got trans characters and it's basically like them taking 2019 values that they want to have fun playing with, but they then play that in a medieval fantasy world, and you think, well, come on, that's not
right.
You're doing some strange concoction that's not really playing in the fantasy Middle Ages,
right? And that does actually. What I was going to say is exactly along those lines. That she, in that big meeting at the end, says we're going to be independent. We're going to, be the North, and we're not going to submit. And Bran basically says, yeah, okay, that makes sense. But the thing is that if we were looking at it from a more realistic point of view, the whole reason a king wants an empire is money, is they're basically hitting up all those monarchs and all those nobles for taxes, for money from all of these places. So it's not so much she's saying that, in the fantasy setting, she may be saying, I want to be free. This is, my philosophical reason for wanting to be free. But on a financial level, she's saying, yeah, you guys are just going to deal with a 30% pay cut.
Yeah.
And he would, even if he was like, yeah, okay, I see your reasons, everybody under him would be like, no, we need their tax money.
Yeah.
So I thought that was amusing. Speaking of morality of these leaders, I did think it was an interesting juxtaposition, and talking about Sansa being being noble and good and everything else, and as opposed to others. I did think in that last season, one interesting sort of opposite setup they have is sort of in the middle of the season, you have the leaders of Winterfell bring in all of their serfs and peasants into the castle because they don't want their serfs and peasants to all be killed. They'll all be turned into zombies or just slaughtered outright by the the Night Walkers and stuff. So instead, they bring them all inside to try and save as many as they can. Well, at the end of the season, you've got Cersei, yeah, whatever. You've got Cersei.
Sorsha is Willow.
Okay. You've got Cersei, who brings the people into her city, not so much to save their lives, but because she wants to try and play on the mercy of Daenerys and use them as human shields. And of course, one works in the sense that the peasants, they may not all have been saved, but many more lives were saved in the Battle of Winterfell by them being behind walls. Whereas in the end, we see that those people who were outside the walls and didn't come in probably just got ignored. I mean, the dragon probably
about the Battle of Winterfell, which is the Long Night, or because you said Winterfell, but it's King's Landing. Which one are you talking about?
I may have in the first one, the Battle of Winterfell. Okay. Sansa and Jon Snow and everyone, they brought everyone in so they wouldn't turn into zombies.
I was confused because you started talking about Cersei.
Right. And most of them were saved. Okay. Then in the end of the season, at the Battle of King's Landing, she brings people in to be human shields, and those people are destroyed. And in fact, it would have been the people who disobeyed, who stayed home just outside of town on their farms, who would have been saved. Because Daenerys wasn't going out to just kill everyone.
Well, Cersei
she just
brought
wanted
them
to blow up the town.
to the Red Keep. But there were still people that probably stayed home, and they were in the city, and all of the city was...
Right.
Yeah, so I don't think it really mattered where in King's Landing you were for that.
Right, you were basically...
You were toast.
Going to be toasted.
Well, but your point still stands in that, at least from a modern leader, you would expect that one of the things they feel that is their responsibility is during wartime to try, to a reasonable degree, to insulate their own civilians from the war. And, it may be that Cersei's actions didn't change absolutely the number of people killed, but her motive was certainly not what you would want from a modern perspective, which is to care about.
Her motives never were.
No. Sorry, I'm not saying it's inconsistent.
Yeah.
I was trying to address this question about how do we judge the ethics of the two actions, and I think even though they're similar in the way you described, Oren, it involved bringing people into a certain location, there's still a very different motive behind it. And
yeah, I agree.
So while we're talking about ethics, and since we're talking about fantasy, I think this is a good opportunity to just go full nerd, and let's just imagine, because all of us are D&D players as well. I'm sure a fair number of our listeners are. So if you were to give, say, Cersei versus Sansa D&D alignments, what do you think they would be?
Okay, the first thing I have to say, because I know I'm gonna mess this up, is you said I'm a D&D player. So I played D&D with you when we were kids. Right. So I have... so I'm probably going to even mess up my understanding of what the alignments are, but I'm going to try.
Okay.
But I can already see, I am not going to do as well at this as the people probably who listen to the podcast. But
of all of us, I think Golden is the one who's played more recently.
And even then, that's not...
Yeah. Okay, so who did you want us to evaluate?
Cersei versus Sansa.
If you just think about Cersei being all about mainly herself and power... I'd have to say she's leaning towards evil. I think that Sansa, in general, I would think is leaning towards good because she's more about everyone and taking care of everyone. If you're going to put Arya in there, I'd put Arya as neutral.
I think the real question is, when talking about Sansa, I agree with you about the good and evil split. But on the one hand, you would think that if you are a a leader of a hierarchical society, if you are the queen of your society, if your entire life is based around a hierarchical system, that you would be lawful, because it is that law, it is that structure.
Oh, I wasn't even getting into
you are
that
relying
part.
on. So that would lead me to believe that maybe Cersei would be lawful evil. But on the other hand, she's done a whole lot of things that are way outside the purview of what her responsibilities and roles are, like blowing up the religious people.
The Red Keep.
What,
what is the name of
the religious
the
thing?
temple?
The sect?
Yes.
Or the...
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember what they were called.
Baelor's Sept of Baelor? Baelor's
Maybe.
Sept? Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But we'll go with that.
It's been a while.
Right.
We'll go with
All
that.
I know is there's a big green explosion in the middle of town. So, obviously that's not
See, I
part
wouldn't
of...
necessarily think that that's chaotic. That just feeds into the fact that in order to save herself, getting rid of them was the way to do it.
So then that could be neutral evil, maybe not chaotic evil, but certainly neutral evil.
That's why I just said evil.
So can I throw a few wrenches in here?
Sure.
So probably it's basically got to be right that Cersei is evil, but there is this wrinkle that we could talk over. So at least at moments, Cersei is presented as a person who has enormous loyalty to her family, especially her children. And there is a question that comes up in everybody's life. What are you willing to do in exchange for protecting your own family and children? I actually once heard a real-world case about this, where there was a person who was working in a job, and as we know in America, if you lose your job, you lose your health insurance. And he had a very sick wife, and he was given a sales target by his boss and said, if you don't hit this sales target, you're fired. And he couldn't hit the sales target. So he committed fraud. He faked the numbers in order to keep health insurance for his wife. And now you think, okay, so does that make him evil? Well, I mean, on the one hand, he's cheating a bunch of people.
No.
But on the other hand, he's trying to take care of his wife, which we regard as a good thing. So I mean, Cersei, of course, she's not this example, right? She's farther in the evil direction.
Her kids have been gone for a while now.
Well, certainly at some point she sort of turns into
and then whether or not then you go into
Right.
that whole, was she ever pregnant? Was she,
at
or
the
is she
very end?
pretending
Oh, at the very end,
to
yeah.
be pregnant
Yeah.
to keep Jaime close?
Yeah.
Is she then pretending to be pregnant to keep the other guy interested? I mean, there's just all of these.
But what do you think about my question? Is she a little bit non-evil
Well,
insofar as she's doing it for her family and her
What's
kids?
interesting about that is there is an argument to be made that it's either a instinct, that it's just instinctual that a parent will take care of its young, or B, maybe that's selfish too. Maybe she wants her kids to survive so that her greatness can be sung for generations to come. Maybe her reasons for wanting her children to succeed are deeply selfish, so it reflects back on her glory.
Yeah.
So
I don't feel like I saw a lot of that in the story. Do you?
yeah, I'm just talking in general. So I don't think her love for her kids is necessarily a softening factor, because, like you said, I don't know how legit it is or not. At the very end, Tyrion says, "Look, I know you love your family." This is when he thinks she's pregnant. Because I know you love your family, save yourself, save your kids, your child, do this. And she doesn't. So,
or she thinks that she doesn't need to do. She thinks she's being manipulated by
Right.
him and doesn't need to do what he's
right.
saying. Yeah, it's
Either
hard to
way,
know.
if someone, if you're a liar, you think everyone's lying.
Right.
If you're a manipulator, you think everyone's always, trying to manipulate you.
So can I do my other wrench in the works, which is
Yeah,
about
yeah.
lawful versus chaotic? So, right, the sort of standard definitions is lawful people believe in a world of order.
Mm-hmm.
And a thing that was always confusing for me about the Game of Thrones world is that, so you might think order means following the rules of succession, right? Because we're dealing with kings and queens, and I don't know what they are, but I know there are rules of succession
Sure.
in Westeros. And of course, we know that those are broken. For example, Robert Baratheon becomes king not in a way that follows the order of succession. He just basically has a rebellion. So I don't actually know within that world what people consider to be sticking to the rules. Like, if they see Robert Baratheon take up a sword and kill the other king and declare himself king, do people say, like, yeah, that's kind of one of the rules? One of the rules is, if you can kill the king, you become king.
Because he's now sitting on the throne.
Right. And is the same thing would be true of Sansa. So you might think, well, she seems to believe in order because she wants there to be a queen and for there to be some sort of social structure up north. But on the other hand, she's throwing away this, I think, long tradition, I don't know how many years it's gone on, of the Seven Kingdoms being the Seven Kingdoms. I mean, do we find out in the story when the North
was independent for quite some time.
Yeah. But how long has it been part of the Seven Kingdoms? A while, right? Anyway, you see the point. If you're willing to disrupt the order.
Is it lawful if you're making the rules up as you go along?
Yeah. The same could be asked of Daenerys, right? So on the one hand, she seems chaotic in that she's coming to Westeros to overthrow everything.
Right.
But on the other hand, she wants to establish an order. It's just going to be an order with her on top. And of course, in her head, it's also the just order because she thinks of herself as the descendant of the rightful king before he was overthrown by Robert. So I don't know where to put these people.
But by the way, I did a quick little search. It was the Great Sept of Baelor.
Okay.
Baelor.
So I don't know. That's my little wrinkle. I don't quite know. If you're willing to overthrow an order and replace it with another one, do you still count as lawful? Maybe you do.
Maybe. Maybe it's all perspective. Maybe you're lawful from the perspective of some of the people. You know, Robert Baratheon may have been lawful from the people who felt they were being oppressed by the Mad King because, you know, he came in and saved them and gave them an order that is legitimate and kind and good, in their opinion.
Yeah.
Whereas, obviously, in the view of his late son and daughter, that was a terrible, terrible decision and completely unlawful.
Yeah. If chaotic means that you don't want the world to have any serious social structure, you want it to be sort of everybody, you know, it's like the Wild West, then is there anyone in Game of Thrones who's chaotic?
I think the wildlings. I think you could make an argument that the wildlings actively oppose any kind of societal structure. It doesn't mean that they don't have people in charge of their villages or whatever, you know, who you can talk to as opposed to everyone else. But they do not want any kind of codified, organized structure.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's safe to say that they are chaotic. Then the question would be, are they chaotic neutral or are they chaotic good? I don't think they're evil. I certainly don't think they're evil. But do they care about sort of the goodness in the sense of the well-being of each other and everything else? Or are they just more neutral? Like they don't care as long as you just stay out of everybody's way.
So you asked, when did the North become part of the Seven Kingdoms? I just did a quick search on what are the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what is quoted from, I think this is called a website called Elite Daily. It is only called that because the day that Aegon landed, that was how it was currently divided. There are 9 kingdoms in Westeros. So the North might not have ever been, during the Game of Thrones books, part of the 7 kingdoms because it was independent. And he was the king in the North.
Who was?
Their father. Ned Stark was the king of the North.
I thought he was just the warden of the North. I thought
he was the warden?
He was the warden of the North, and he pledged allegiance to Robert Baratheon, who was his buddy.
It's been so long. I don't remember.
But I certainly would believe that it was a kingdom until Ned Stark took over, pledged allegiance to his buddy, and then when everything fell apart, if I recall correctly, it was the nobles, when Jon Snow won it back, who basically said, we want a king in the North.
Right.
And it's gonna be you.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, poo. But
so with your question about the wildlings, I guess I would assume that they were, if they're chaotic, that they're chaotic neutral, because I always thought of neutral as something like the average human being. Mm-hmm. That is, you have some altruism in you, but let's face it, we all have selfishness in us. And I always thought that good was more like King Arthur level good. The truly self-sacrificial, saintly person. And I would just, it's no knock on the wildlings or anyone else. It's just the idea that average people are average people, and most of us fit into that neutral category.
Right.
So I guess when Aegon came, House Arryn bent the knee along with House Stark, and they were granted the Vale area.
Oh, okay. So it's when Aegon became king.
That'll do it.
who arrive from the east with dragons.
and this is from
Right.
a website called Elite Daily, so that's if their information is correct.
How could the
Like I
internet
said,
be wrong?
I am
It's
not
never wrong.
an
Never happened.
expert because I've only read the books once.
Right.
For the most part, I think I've only seen the entire series once.
Sure.
So
I haven't even
I'm
seen
not
the
gonna
entire
remember
series, so you're
everything.
still up on me. I think I would consider Jon Snow to be neutral good because I think he is someone who his moral compass is that he wants to do what is right. That he has a guiding principle of how life should be, supported, enriched, etc. And he's, I think, less concerned about law, even though he ran the Watch for a while. He's from a noble family, but I think kind of the background of being raised as a bastard, even though he wasn't, I think it immediately kind of gave him an understanding that these rules can sometimes be stupid. And so I don't think he was ever focused on keeping the rules, nor is he so anti-rule that he wouldn't become, the supreme executive when he was asked to be. But I think he's an example of neutral good to me.
Yeah. And I hate to keep bringing it back to that initial question I posed, but I assume you mean good relative to the morality
right.
of the fiction.
The morality of the fiction.
Because, yeah, by modern standards, probably not a very good guy.
which one now?
Jon
Sorry.
Snow.
John.
Though, interestingly, is Jon Snow such a good-hearted person that if he found himself in modern times with democracy and representative rule and everything else, would he say like this? Would he go back to his sort of more, kind of noble way of thinking? Like, no, this is wrong. The people can't do this. We need a. I need to be king. Or would he just say, you know what? Okay, this is how it's done here. I guess I need to relearn everything. I guess I need to school myself.
I
or
do
be
think
schooled
he
on
would
how
embrace it.
We do it here.
Just like, he goes to live with the wildlings. He learns how they live.
I agree.
And
I think he would be one who would
even
try
there
and modernize.
flips his thinking. He's thought of the wildlings as these evil, horrible people and finds something completely different than what he expected. So if that happens there, I think if you put Jon Snow into our world, he would be in awe and he would be learning and trying to figure out what his place in it was.
I think if you brought him into the modern world, his mind would be shattered.
He'd also probably
could
be
be.
upset with all
That
of
could
the
be.
negative things and people in power that shouldn't be in power. He'd probably have a problem with that.
But to give a more serious answer, I mean, so I don't even think there is a real answer to what would happen if you brought.
Of course
John,
not.
Yeah, but
We're just having
but
fun.
a thing I think we modern people tend to forget is this whole idea of democracy and individual rights and so on is a very tiny blip in human history.
Right.
For most of human history, most human beings thought it made perfect sense that you elect some, basically brutal ruler. And what made for a good ruler was that ruler was on your side and was oppressing the other people you didn't like. And so whether you could have somebody suddenly unlearn all of that, if you snap them into the modern world, I don't know. It takes
so
a lot.
things haven't really changed all that much.
It takes a lot of education and and indoctrination, frankly, to get people to believe in what we think of as rights-based democracy. But I don't know. Maybe we want to fantasize about Jon Snow and think he's the guy.
He is the guy. He's the
medieval
our
lord.
messianic figure that will save us. Okay, so a few more, just a couple more questions before we call this episode. So, do we think that the final season tainted, that's the word I'll use, our view of the series as a whole? Because there's always people who cry on the internet, like this show or this season or this whatever, like, killed my childhood, basically, that this destroyed everything for me. Do you feel that the last season tainted your feelings towards the show or the rest of the show or what have you?
Well, I mean, I guess, yes. I mean, I'm not one of those people who you just described as saying that this ruined their childhood or something. But, a lot of us invested time over 8 years. and we wanted it to end well, and we didn't think it ended well, and that's always, it's disappointing, right? And what happens, of course, is that fictional characters, the only facts we have about them are the ones created in the fiction. There's no real them. Whatever the writers do, that's who they are.
Right. All we have is what the art is in front of us.
Yeah, and so we now know the arc of Jon Snow's life, and we know the arc of Sansa's life, and we know the arc of Bran's life, and so on. And they played that out in a certain way that some of us found unsatisfying. So, yes, we were trying to follow a story, and it didn't.
And it petered out.
It didn't go well for some of us. So that you can't undo that. You can't just say, well, but the first part of this, it's like if you were reading a Shakespeare play or something, and it was really great 4/5 of the way through, and then the ending was horrible or something, and you can't just comfort yourself by saying it was 4/5 good, right? The ending really matters in drama. It really matters.
I read the book It as a kid. I read the book Misery as a kid.
Oh,
and I felt like Stephen King told a really great story, and then it was like, oh shoot, this book needs to be finished tomorrow. Okay, there's the end.
Right.
And I felt that way about both of those books.
And I bet you didn't take any comfort in the idea that it was 90% good, because in a story, what we care about, right? The arc sits as a whole.
I have, since I was 9 or 10 years old, always had that flavor or taste in my mouth, figuratively, about Stephen King books. Okay, is this going to be another that's like that? And I'm wondering what the next series that these guys do, next movies or whatever it is, are they going to repeat that? And
that's a good point.
That's kind of, and I've mentioned that to you before.
Yeah.
I wonder if some of the confidence in them was lost because of this. But like you said, maybe their heart wasn't into it the end here. I don't think that the last season killed the entire thing for me. It just, I'm glad I wasn't throwing a big party. Viewing party. I'm glad I wasn't one of those people that was getting a whole group of people together to watch it together to then all be disappointed together.
Right.
And for the most part, it's not that it was that disappointing. It would have been nice to see that one episode with the battle at Winterfell, the long night, or whatever
actually
it's
be
called.
able to see what was on the screen because it was so
I don't
dark.
really feel like we saw it, except for a few pieces here and there, because most of us are streaming this. How are you not streaming this? And for I think there's like something over there. No, that's just a blotchy black or blue there, and it was just the filming, the way they filmed it, and. Hey, maybe it's going to be incredible when it's available on DVD. But how many people are going to go buy it on DVD or Blu-ray or whatever when they were so disappointed with it?
Yeah. There's a lightened version on YouTube. I don't know if it's a sanctioned or some
It's not sanctioned. I've seen pieces of it, though.
It's a good scene once you can see it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I know how you do that in software, and it's always a compromise, The creative team, they wanted certain, shadows to be in certain places. They wanted certain things to be darker than other things and everything else. And what they did is they basically, they didn't just turn up the brightness knob. I mean, they graded various sections that were too dark separately. But what it does is it changes the ratios and the proportions of various elements on the screen. So it was easier to see, but it also wasn't what the original creators had in mind. So like Golden said, the best way to see it would be on the Blu-ray, where it simply isn't compressed. And so you don't get banding artifacts and things like that.
Yeah, it would have been nice if they released that at the same time as it aired on HBO.
Or if they showed it in a theater. They had like one day, special event where it was in a theater, so you could actually go and see it on a huge screen.
I think that would have been good. And I think I suggested that, didn't I?
Yeah.
I said that would have been kind of interesting to do like a Fathom event and come see Game of Thrones.
Yeah, so my last question plays right off that one. And now that we've sort of talked about did this kill the show for us? Then the final question I want to ask is, are we looking forward to the prequel series that will be out like in, I think, 2020 or whatever, of the Game of Thrones world? I think it's like 1,000 years in the past or something like that. I don't remember.
Maybe.
Are we looking forward to that or not?
I haven't really looked it up at all. I figure, I'll be interested when it gets here.
Yeah, I think I'm looking forward to it because, look, I think even with stuff that's really good, there's nothing wrong with being a critic and talking about it because, not to sound grandiose, but I think art is important and it matters that storytelling is done well. And I think,
agree.
I don't think you're just being a nitpicker if you try to think through whether or not storytelling was done well. So okay, we've criticized it, but nonetheless, it is one of the better TV shows I've watched in recent years. And if they can pull off something similar, I think it's going to be worth watching.
You just need to come hang out over here for a while. We'll show you some really good TV.
I would echo that. As far as my confidence in the creators go, I still do have confidence in them because I think they have a feeling for the world. I think they rushed the ending of Game of Thrones, but maybe since this is more their baby, they won't do that because it'll be more personal. But that said, the proof will be in the pudding. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I'm not just automatically thinking it's going to be the greatest show ever. I am cautiously optimistic about the Amazon Video Lord of the Rings that is supposed to, I think, hit in 2020 or whatever, because I love Lord of the Rings. I love that world. I love the universe and the mythology that Tolkien created. And I think that good creators can really have a field day playing in it.
It should be interesting in terms of, fantasy, where Carnival Row goes. And that's another one that's not meant for kids necessarily. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's on Amazon.
Will be August 30th.
Yeah.
We talked about it in our Comic-Con episode. You'll want to see it.
There's some really interesting shows. Netflix is like taking the football and running the field. It's like the ball keeps getting kicked off to them and they just keep running it down the field and dropping it on the other sides. Yeah, it's just scoring.
This is definitely a golden age for television, that's for sure.
So I think overall, I'm not happy with how, like I said at the beginning, how they handled the season 8. I'm okay with how it ended. I think that it's just an awful waste of energy for people just to be voicing how angry and upset.
Some people, they take fandom very seriously, and it is very, very upsetting.
So, but otherwise, I still think it was a really wonderful series. I really like what they did with the characters. I think we did say that there was something about the fact that in some of these episodes, fewer people died in a couple of them than any other episodes. Not the big war ones, but
less body count. Yay!
And a couple of they made up for it in the other ones.
Right, and then they just roasted everybody.
And one thing you did not talk about before we go was Dany and whether or not her vision, if she really felt like she was freeing people, that they, in order to free them, that she really needed to go over that line, or whether or not she just really lost it.
Well, I feel like, so at least for me, what this brings up is the fact that, any of the shows or stories we love, they're never perfect. And to some degree, I think we're always telling ourselves little stories where we're filling in the gaps, right? So if you're a fan of original Star Trek, sure, it makes no sense that you take all of your important officers and beam them down into emergency situations, but you tell yourself a little story about why that is the case, and you get past it. And it felt to me like the Daenerys situation was the same thing. So you have to tell yourself a little story about how she's, going mad from paranoia. And she does give that one speech where she says, what I've realized is they will never love me here, so I must be feared. And if you fill all that in, which wasn't done in the show, but if you fill all of that in, then you might think, okay, this makes sense. But I guess what you have to realize is that it's not the story doing that. You're doing the backfilling.
Right.
And that's how I felt.
Well, that and all her life, she's gone towards the throne. And now she has the throne. So she's kind of lost her objective. She's gained it, but there's nothing beyond it. Because what do you do? And to her it was, oh, well, now I guess I have to, over on the other side of the water, I had to free everyone and they need to be freed now.
I have less problem with Dany becoming the Mad Queen than I do with her dragon deciding that since Jon Snow murdered her, the best response is to torch the chair.
Oh, see, I liked that part best.
Okay, did both of you see this reveal that happened about what was going on in this scene? So that particular episode, I may get some of the intricate details wrong, but that particular episode was nominated for some award, like, I don't know, an Emmy or something. So they had to, part of that is you have to release the script. And in the script, it apparently specifically says that the dragon is not doing this on purpose to melt the throne. It's supposed to be that he's spraying fire wildly and the throne is just in the way. So weirdly, although most of these questions we never know the objective answer to, at least if you believe that the script determines the fiction, we do know that I've forgotten his name, Drogon, the dragon, was not purposely trying to melt the throne.
Oh, see, I like it better. The fact that in my mind, the story that I came up with is this.
Golden, you should have been on the writing staff.
Is that
I'm telling you.
Drogon was so connected to Dany. He knew that her objective was this throne.
Yeah.
And in Drogon's mind, Jon didn't kill her. This throne did. They were happy over there. They were free over there. And the throne, this obsession with the throne, is ultimately what caused her demise.
I want to watch this series.
So that's why Drogon decided, I don't need to kill Jon. It's not Jon's fault. It's this stupid piece of metal, and I've got something for you. I've got something for you. Here it is.
So
you're gone.
In your mind, the way so this is an interesting way, again, in which you and I imagine the series differently. I didn't imagine these dragons as being the kind of intelligent dragons you get in Dungeons and Dragons. They always seem to me to be kind of, for lack of a better word, beastly. I didn't. So when people proposed that Drogon had done this on purpose, my first reaction was something like, well, he's got the intelligence of a cat, right? I couldn't imagine that was really what was happening. But then again, maybe.
Well, I mean,
you're imagining an empathetic.
They don't kill
connection.
Tyrion when he's feeding them. I mean, they kind of get that Tyrion is not, and Tyrion goes to free them too in one of the previous series, one of the seasons. So,
well, but
to
cats
me, it was
don't
just,
always scratch the hell out of you.
But
when
it was
you go
just
to, feed
to me,
them.
it was like
right?
Drogon understood, and this is not necessarily saying that he's extremely intelligent. He understood what she wanted.
Like an emotional kind of
an attachment,
sympathetic connection.
I mean, of all of them, her relationship with him has been the closest throughout. He's the one that got free.
He's more like one of those sheepdogs, actually, right? So if something gets near their sheep, they know to go either run the sheep away or run the thing away. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're having a thought like, hey, something's near my sheep.
Yeah.
It's more
he doesn't
they know what the object is.
He doesn't I think it was Drogon that didn't like how close Jon was getting to Dany.
Yeah.
In terms of, because this is mom.
Right.
This person means a lot to him. And to me, in that scene, it wasn't about, oh, well, I'm just going to be upset and dragon fire everywhere. It was, this is the thing that's, I'm taking it off the board. I am taking this off the board so that no one else can have it.
I like your script better than the actual script.
So, I mean, to me, it was very sad to see Dany lose it, because had she not gone crazy on the city and just gone straight to the Red Keep, taken Cersei off the board, then I think that the people could have loved her. The people could have gotten to know her. John could be beside her. John could eventually get over oh yeah, we're related. Okay. In previous, okay, people are allowed to be related. Okay, I can deal with this. It's going to take me a while, but I think we need to ease into this. And maybe I can come back to this.
It is amusing to think that in some cultures, their relation with their familial relations would just not have been that big of it. It's like you weren't raised together. Okay, it's all good then.
So, okay, so that was a little segue there before we were ending your podcast.
It's all good.
But
it's all good.
I know that was on your notes, and it was something that was another. I mean, like you said, we all make up our stories about what happened.
Well, hey, thank you, Alex. Thank you, Golden.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And that's it for this episode. You can find the show notes at theomegabeam.com/48. If you like this episode, please leave a review in the Apple Podcasts app or wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help people who might be interested in this kind of stuff to find the podcast. If you have any questions or suggestions, please drop us a line at info@theomegabeam.com. Be good to yourselves and each other, and we'll catch you next time.